I see some interesting questions coming up already, talking about whether or not you can get pregnant at this time. I am going to address that tonight. I definitely want to talk about that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of confusion out there. It's been, quite frankly, consistently confusing for us as well. And so I'll give you as much data as I can on what we know and what we don't know, and we'll move forward from there. Tonight's topic is, do physical activity, sitting time, and body mass index affect fertility over a 15-year period in women? Data from a large population-based cohort study. So make sure you like, subscribe, comment. Those are all hugely important for us to make this better for you. And we want to make sure that we give you the best opportunity we can. So all of that support helps us make the show better every week. And we definitely read them and try and follow what you guys say. So this is a really interesting study, brand new, just this week, published in Human Reproduction, and that's a European sort of premier fertility and infertility journal. And they looked at a study from Australia where they had 6,130 women, and they each reported over several time instances in a 15-year period on sort of surveys that were done for the community and for all of Australia, actually. So the questions that they asked essentially were, how much time did you sit? How much physical activity did you have? And then self-reports of your body mass index calculated by your height and weight. The fertility questions fell into, no, I never tried to get pregnant. No, I never had a problem with fertility. Yes, I had a problem, but I never looked for help. And yes, I did have a problem, and I also looked for help. So it was a pretty decent study, and they were asking kind of all the right questions to get an answer for whether or not there was a relationship between your physical activity, your sitting time, your body mass index, and fertility. So when they did this study, they actually initially identified, I think, over 10,000 women, but they had to kind of sequentially reduce some of the women from the study because some of the data was missing. So some people didn't report all the data, some people didn't report on fertility, and these are the kinds of problems we run into with all of this data, because the data is only good as the information that you ask for and that you can actually track. So if you don't track sufficient amounts of information, if you don't track sufficient data, or you're not asking the right questions, you're not going to end up with the information that you want, or the answers that you want, or even the analysis that you want at the end of it all. So when they looked at the overall categories, they said 10% of the women in the study reported doing no physical activity, which is kind of concerning. 32.7% reported low activity. 23.8% reported moderate, and 33.5% reported high levels of physical activity. So kind of concerning. You've got almost half the population, the 10% with none and the 32.7% with low, that are actually reporting very low or no levels of activity. And obviously that's a substantial number of people out of 6,000 that are really doing not enough for their daily health, let alone for fertility. When they then looked at sitting time, a third of the women, 32.9%, reported sitting for less than 4.5 hours per day. About half, 42.9%, reported moderate sitting time, while about 24.2% said they sat for more than 8 hours per day. Now keep in mind, some of these are desk workers where they are sitting at a desk for part of the day, so this isn't about blame, it's just about reporting. So the overall incidence of problems in this population with fertility was 15.4%. And they started tracking this in 2000. And we know the fertility or infertility rate is actually increasing over time, with estimates being as high as somewhere between 20 to 30% by the time we get to 2050, and even by 2030 they're saying it'll be as high as 20%. So the fact that the report in this study was 15 15.4 from 2000 till 2015 is actually very, very significant. That shows that basically a very high percentage of couples, almost 1 out of 6, 1 out of 7, are actually infertile. We used to tell people it was much less, but obviously this is a growing problem for all of us. So we want to do as much as we possibly can to try and help people. So when they actually looked at the data from this is very, very interesting. When you actually check out what happened with these patients, when you look at physical activity levels, if you were in the high physical activity level, you had an 18% decrease in your incidence of infertility. In other words, if you are physically active and you have a high level of physical activity, you had a substantial decrease in the chances of experiencing infertility. So that's really important, because for people that are infertile, this means if you maintain a higher level of physical activity, it should reduce your chances of being infertile or suffering with fertility problems. So that in and of itself is really, really critical. We don't have that kind of data from a lot of different studies. There are a couple of previous studies that have looked at similar topics, never anything quite this large. And some have shown promise with interventions like exercise plans for 6 months or so, while others have actually shown no benefit. But this is a much broader, longer scale study. And because of that, this is really, really valuable information to know. So even increasing your levels of activity should help, but definitely once you're into that high category, you are seeing a highly statistically significant decrease in your infertility risk. And again, that's almost a 20% decrease, which is huge when you factor in that they're saying 15% of their population was infertile. When they looked at sitting time, thankfully, actually does not impact your fertility. So for those of you that work at a desk job, you know, that's okay. And we all respect and love you guys for whatever you're doing. So don't feel like every 5 seconds you got to get up and run a little marathon or anything like that. Desk work is valuable and we respect that. And it looks like it's not impacting your success. Having said that, if your sitting time is sitting on the couch, that's a different story. My kids are probably saying, "Dad, you sit on the couch at night." In my defense, I'm preparing our IVF manual, so I try and stay active. And these days, obviously, technology is helping us a lot. I know in my family there's a couple of Apple Watches, and you know that thing tells you to get up and move if you haven't been moving in a long enough period of time. So technology can help us. It can remind you to do things. I bought my dad a Fitbit because he wouldn't move, and I told him you have to maintain the 10,000 steps, and it actually has helped him a little bit. So those sorts of techno bits can help us and be assistants, adjuncts to what we already need to do. The biggest change here was really in the patients who suffered from an elevated BMI. So I'm sure by now you know that BMI is broken down into different categories. There's normal or underweight, there's overweight, and then there is obese. So in the patients that were overweight, there was a borderline significance, almost 20% increase in infertility. Now I say borderline because the confidence interval, which is the sort of gradation of where the data lies, crossed 1. And statistically, when you cross 1, your significance drops off. But it was 0.99, so it's really, really close. And that probably means that if we had a bigger study, more numbers, there's a reasonable chance to anticipate that those patients or that data would also demonstrate significance there. When they looked at women who were obese, though, you actually had a 36% increase in infertility, and that was very significant. So again, weight definitely in this study over a 15-year period, looking at thousands and thousands of Australian women, did show a very significant impact. And the Australian population is a little bit different than our North American population. Australia's population actually tends to be a little bit more fit than ours. Only 6% of the women in this study were actually obese. So you really can see a very significant impact in that narrow group and see that it's actually very strongly impacting their success rates and their fertility history. The last little bit is looking at normal weight women. So what they did at the end of the study was they broke it down by which category you were in. Were you normal weight, overweight, or obese? And they looked at the impact of your physical activity. And interestingly, although there were some trends in there, the highest impact was in women who were normal weight. So women who were normal weight and had high levels of physical activity had the lowest infertility rates, 36% down if you were in the high physical activity group, which was almost 1,200 women, and 26% lower if you were in the moderate physical activity group. So the fertility factor fiction question for tonight was, does your physical activity, sitting time, and BMI impact your fertility? And the answer is, it is a fact, they do. So increased physical activity will decrease your infertility or increase your chances of success in getting pregnant. And sitting time does not appear to have a huge impact, but your body mass index seems to have a very significant impact. And it is important to tie in the physical activity and the body mass index, because obviously the more physically active you are, the less your body mass index likely will be. And so those are intricately and intimately related to one another. So again, we are very happy to have this opportunity to share all this information with you guys. I'm excited to be back on again this week. If you notice me keeled over, it's because I have a kidney stone that is developing on my left side, and that is slowly torturing me. But I am trying to chug some fluids, so I've got my trusty tea mug here, and I'll keep chugging, hopefully survive the hour. I will